Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Mr. Covalent and today we are going to continue going over chemical bonds. In this video I am going to be going over covalent bonds. Last video I went over ionic bonds. If you don't remember what ionic bonds are, go back to that video. What are covalent bonds? Well, we need to kind of compare that to ionic bonds. If we remember, ionic bonds are bonds that are created by the electrostatic forces between two ions that are created by the transfer of an electron from your metal to your nonmetal. So the metal loses an electron, becomes positive. The nonmetal picks up the electron, becomes negative, and then the negative and positive charges on the atoms attract each other, and that's what creates your ionic bond. So they stick together by those forces. Okay, so that's different from covalent bonds. In covalent bonds, the electrons are not transferred. So you have two nonmetals here. So the two nonmetals are going to want the electrons equally, or they both want electrons. So in the case of metals and nonmetals, metals want to give away their electrons and nonmetals want to take them. But in the case where you have nonmetals together and no metal, then both nonmetals are going to want an electron. Right, and we'll get into later why that is. Why do both of these want an electron? And that gets into something called electronegativity, which I will discuss at a later time. So here we have our two nonmetals. Both of them want an electron, so there's not going to be a transfer, right? So instead, they are going to share the electrons that they have. And so what happens is instead of having one electron transfer over to another, you see that this one has one and this one has one, and they want to share. Now here I have these symbols. These are called Lewis dot symbols. Again, this is something I'm going to discuss later, but I'm just putting this here so you can kind of see what's going on. So here you have an electron, here you have an electron, and so the idea is that both of these want an electron. So instead of transferring one electron to the other, they are going to share these two electrons. So these two electrons are now going to be shared between the two atoms. So here I'm going to draw the symbol again, but now the two electrons are going to be between the two atoms. And so here you kind of have kind of a glue, right? So here the electrons are being shared between the two chlorine atoms. So how does this hold the atoms together? Well, if you remember, you had electrostatic charges between the ions because you had positive and negative. Well, you have a similar thing going on here, except it's not between atoms. It's not charges between atoms. It is the charges of the particles themselves, the electrons and the positive nuclei, which has your protons. So you can think of this as you have the positive nucleus at the center of the atom, and the positive nucleus is because of the positive protons. And you've got the negative electrons here that are being shared. So you got negative, right? You got negative, negative, right? So here you have the negative charges. So opposites attract, and like charges repel. So these guys, these electrons are negative. They're not really going to like to be near each other, but they are both attracted to the positive nuclei. So what's that going to do is the negative electrons are attracted to the positive nuclei. The positive nuclei are not attracted to each other. They repel. Okay? So, but they are attracted to the electrons. So what's going to happen is that the electrostatic charges of the nuclei are going to be attracted to the electrons that are in the middle, bringing them closer. But then again, you have the positive charges repelling. So there's going to be a balancing. And again, I mentioned in the last video that in ionic substances, you get an arrangement called the lattice structure, and how those ions are arranged is determined by what structure gives you the lowest potential energy. And again, nature wants lowest energy possible, lowest potential energy possible. And again, to remind you that potential energy has to do with the positioning of things, right? In this case, we're talking about the positioning of charged particles. So here, it turns out that whatever distance this is, that's going to be the lowest energy at that distance. And so it also turns out that if you have the electrons out here, the farther the electrons are, so if these electrons are out here, right, not between the atoms, so if they're out here or over here, right, so that's going to be higher potential energy. So to be lower potential energy, the electrons stay in between the two atoms because that is the most favorable situation. So lowest potential energy. And that is what creates the covalent bond. So these two atoms stay together because they are both attracted to the electrons, and the electrons are attracted to both a positively charged nuclei. And so that's what creates your covalent bond. And so now what you have is a molecule. So whenever you have two things that are covalently bonded together, you have one unit, and this is called your molecular compound. Or we could call it a molecule. Right? So molecule, remember, if you remember before, molecule comes from the Latin word molecula, which means small mass. Okay, so molecule. So we only use the term molecule when we're talking about covalently bonded substances, things that are made out of nonmetals. We don't use molecule when we're talking about ionic substances. So ionic substances are not called molecules. We actually, instead of molecules, we use another term called formula units. So if you remember, if I have NaCl, so your sodium was positive, your chlorine was negative, they come together, we write this formula. This is called a formula unit. We don't call this a molecule because you don't have covalent bonds here. This is a molecule because you have a covalent bond between the two chlorine atoms. So I hope this is clear and helpful. If you like this video, share it with your friends. Go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, make a comment down in the comment section. Anything you want me to talk more about, let me know, and I can create a video. If you hit the notification bell, you will get more notifications over when I put out new videos. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.